So at the end of last video, we saw that Quine thinks not only that there aren't properties, but that there aren't meanings. Rather, statements can be meaningful, but their meaningfulness doesn't depend on them having a meaning. It depends instead on the behaviors and practices, the behaviors that surround uses of the statement. Now, this is going to lead naturally to a question that McX and Wyman might pose, which is, well, look, Quine, you don't think that Pegasus exists. You don't think that properties exist. You don't think that meanings exist. What the heck do you think exists? And Quine is going to answer that question. But before we answer that question, let's situate his answer in sort of a historical tradition. So here's a question. What is metaphysics? And here's some quotes from various philosophers. John McTaggart is famed for his A and B theories of time. He says this metaphysics is the systematic study of the ultimate nature of reality. Here's a quote from Susan Stebbing, who's a 20th century analytic philosopher. She says, metaphysics is a systematic study concerned to show what is the structure of the facts in the world to which reference is made, wherever a true statement is made. Now that sounds like a mouthful, but I want you to think about it because it includes a assumption that meaning or at least reference and metaphysics are closely connected. So the idea is metaphysics is studying the ultimate structure of the facts, the world, but it's not just the world independent of language, it's the world to which we refer whenever a true statement is made. So metaphysics is studying the world we refer to whenever we say something true. Here's a quote from Wikipedia. Metaphysics is a traditional branch of philosophy concerned with explaining the fundamental nature of being and the world. So what is of being? You might think it's of existence and grounding or something like that. Here's a quote from Carnap. Metaphysicians do indeed venture to make a lot of statements about nature, but such metaphysics is not theory, but rather poetry. And here's a quote, here's a bit of etymology. Metaphysics is the name given by an editor to the work by Aristotle that followed his book commonly known as Aristotle's Physics. Metaphysics, meta means after, so it's like after the physics. This is a bit controversial, whether this is the right etymology. But at any rate, what I want you to see is you have three kind of views on which metaphysicians have something to do. They study kind of the ultimate nature of reality or the ultimate nature of the reality to which we refer or something along those lines. And then you have Carnap, who's like, look, metaphysics is nonsense. And Carnap's view was very influential. In fact, you might even say it became kind of the dominant view amongst philosophers from the early 20th century until Quine wrote this paper, at which point shortly after, Quine's view supplanted it. So what is Quine's view? Well, again, Carnap says metaphysics is nonsense. Metaphysical theorizing is all nonsense. And Quine is going to say that Carnap almost got it right. Most metaphysical theorizing is nonsense, but there is something for metaphysicians to do. And what he says is metaphysicians can do this. They can identify what exists. So that's the sole job of metaphysicians, to identify what exists. Whereas Carnap thinks that entities exist only relative to a language, or one chooses among languages where one chooses among languages on pragmatic grounds. So which objects exist is going to be a sort of a pragmatic decision we make, not something we learn about the nature of reality. Quine thinks that metaphysicians can identify what exists in some more robust sense. It might not be quite what you expect, but in some more robust sense. Okay, why I say it might not be quite what you expect. Quine doesn't think that deciding what exists requires deciding between, say, realism and idealism. So I've mentioned before that idealists think that tables and chairs, or at least they can, like Berkeley thought that tables and chairs and bodies and trees and so on exist. He just thought they were built out of ideas. They were built out of minds. Whereas the realists said many of those things exist independently of minds. Quine says, look, identifying what exists doesn't require deciding between those two theories. Carnap was right that you can't decide between those two theories. But you can still decide what exists, and it's not just existence relative to a language. Okay, so that's what he thinks the job is. And the question is, how do you do that? How do you identify what exists? And here's the rough idea. We identify our best scientific theory, that is the theory that best explains and predicts our experiences. So you have this stream of experiences, figure out which theory best explains it. You then quantify over all the entities posited by that theory. And the idea there very roughly and intuitively for our purposes is this. Whatever entities your best scientific theory says exist, those are the ones that exist. Now, that's not quite right, but that's the basic idea. Okay, So now we can talk about Quine on ontological commitment, returning to our earlier dialectic. McX is going to say, after Quine says that properties don't exist and meanings don't exist, it's now looking like you have no ontological commitments at all. An ontological commitment is just, ontology is the study of existence, and a commitment is something you have to say. So an ontological commitment is just something you have to say exists. So McX is saying, look, you don't think anything exists. And Quine says, we are convicted of a particular ontological presupposition if and only if the alleged presupposition has to be reckoned among the entities over which our variables range in order to render our affirmations true. Now, what the heck does that mean? All it means is this. If you say something, I say the grass is green, or there's a tree outside this window, or whatever, you're committed to the existence of whatever is required to make that sentence true. So if that sentence being true requires that there is grass and there is a property of greenness, then you're committed to grass and greenness. If that sentence being true doesn't require that there is grass and there is greenness, then you're not committed to those things. So his idea is that you're committed to whatever is required to make your theories true. Now, I like that he says convicted here. It's like you don't want ontological commitments. When he says convicted, it's like built in that he likes simplicity, right? You're convicted of a particular ontological commitment. It's like you have to do this terrible, unparsimonious thing and accept an ontological commitment. If in order for what you say to be true, that thing has to exist. Now he's going to elaborate, and he says, suppose, for example, that I assert that Pegasus was birthed from Medusa's head. By my rephrasing scheme, according to which that sentence means the flying horse is birthed from Medusa's head, that would commit me to the existence of a flying horse who was birthed from Medusa's head. I could cash this out by saying that Pegasus exists or saying that something has the property being Pegasus. It doesn't really matter. Of course, I don't think Pegasus exists, but the principle applies more generally. So what he says the principle applies more generally, what he means is just as Pegasus exists commits him to the statement there is a flying horse that was birthed from, Pegasus, the statement Pegasus was birthed from Medusa's head commits him to this, that there is a flying horse that was birthed from Medusa's head. It commits him to the existence of something that has the property, being a flying horse and having been birthed from Medusa's head, and to the claim that nothing else has that property. So it commits him to the existence of an object, and it commits him to the existence of an object that has those properties. But remember, when he says has those properties, he doesn't really mean that there are those properties, because there aren't really properties. He just means an object that we would say is a flying horse, and that we would say was birthed from Medusa's head. Okay. Now his ontology includes everything that is the value of a variable over which I quantify. If I assert there is an x such that x flies, then I am committed to the existence of something that flies. If I say there is a property that my shirt has, then I am committed to that property. He, of course, thinks you shouldn't say there is a property that your shirt has. Instead, he thinks you should say there is a shirt that is yellow, and that doesn't commit you to the property. It just commits you to a classificatory practice on our part. We're going to call it yellow. Okay, choosing an ontology. Okay, but how do we choose between competing ontologies? Quine says, first, we identify our best scientific theory. Second, we identify every set of objects that could make all declarative sentences in that theory true. Third, we choose the simplest set of objects that would do it. And fourth, we say those are the ones that exist. What if two theories are equally simple? Well, Quine says, then don't choose between them. Okay, if no theoretical desiderata, that might be like simplicity, explanatory comprehensiveness, and so on, support one theory over the other, just remain neutral. Okay, and that's where we're going to stop this discussion of Quine.